Thank you so much for braving the very, very cold temperatures to be with us tonight. We're very grateful that you've come to our warm setting to meet one of our wonderful alumni, and actually hear from two of our alumni in of our latest book talks of Ellie Krieger's books. We're so happy to always have you here and to celebrate good food and good nutrition and to share her expertise with all of you. So we hope that you'll come to other TC alumni events. Academic Festival is on April 2nd, so definitely keep reading your newsletter, keep looking at the calendar, and come back for more. But for now, I'll just turn things over to one of our faculty members in the nutrition education program, Pam Cooke.
Thank you, Rosella. And thank you, Ellie, for being here. I want to share before we get started that Ellie and I were actually students here together in the early 1990s, so sat in many TC classrooms together, and here we are together now.
It's amazing.
And our children, her daughter and my sons, actually went to the same elementary school at pretty much the same time. And we were really involved in the wellness committee together, and actually Ellie did an amazing job of putting together, we worked together on an application for something called the Healthier U.S. School Challenge, which is really part of Michelle Obama's Let's Move initiative to really recognize schools that are doing a really great job with wellness. And I actually went on the website today. We're off of it because I think our years ran out. Oh. But we're still the only New York City public school out of 1,800 New York City public schools that has gotten this award. So yay to us, right? Yeah. So Ellie, what I really love about all of your cookbooks is actually the kind of theme that you have for titling them and then how you put them together. Like So Easy, which makes it seem like everybody can do this, right? Let's just healthy recipes for every meal of the week. Or Weekend Wonders, delicious healthy recipes in 30 minutes or less. So you always kind of give people tips on how to do things. So your latest cookbook that we're celebrating tonight is You Have It Made, delicious healthy do-ahead meals with over 140 recipes. So tell us a little bit about what you had in mind when you were thinking about this and why people should cook ahead.
Yeah. So basically I'm writing cookbooks to solve my own problems. I mean, I feel like if something I find that I need, and then I also really listen to what other people, whether it's through social media or friends talking or just meeting people at events like this, what they're telling me they need. And so what I feel, and this comes back very much to what I learned at TC, because what I learned in Isabel Contento's class, for example, is that, you know, we can have knowledge about nutrition, but we really need to ultimately create behavior change. And very often people know, I feel like most people who are picking up one of my books, they kind of know they should be eating more vegetables or cooking more. We know these things. We don't necessarily need to be told. So where's the disconnect? And very often it's these lifestyle factors that I see myself as bridging the gap between knowing and doing. And so I look at where are the barriers and what are the solutions. And a big barrier is time, not only for me, but for everyone. And if you look at the statistics of what people say, why they don't cook, they say time. And so with Weeknight Wonders, I really address that by saying, okay, here are 150 meals that you can make in 30 minutes or less, literally, even without a sous chef, right? I included chopping everything. And then with You Have It Made, I kind of tackle that time problem from the same, it's the same coin, but it's the other side of the coin. The flip side of that is if you can prepare your food ahead of time, you can just de-stress, take the stress out of having healthy food on the table. And it just really creates a much more relaxed, evening and helps you manage your time better. And it's really amazing how many foods really freeze well or stay in the refrigerator well. And so it was a real adventure for me and learning experience to even be testing the recipes and so on. But that's what sort of inspires me, to try to find solutions for people. How do you manage this on a day-to-day basis? And it's completely doable. I think a lot of us feel that we're overwhelmed and we can't do it, but you absolutely can. You just need the right tools.
Yes, yes. That's great. Well, and I know too, when you were here talking about weeknight wonders, what she said was, as she was testing the recipe, she actually chopped really slowly, so she could actually make sure that it really was 30 minutes or less. So that's how seriously she takes all of it.
I was trying to pretend that I didn't have a sharp knife, like I was picturing my mother-in-law's knife. And
Actually, let me just share this before we get to the next question. Is one time Ellie, actually, my mom, who's a very big fan of Ellie's, my mom and I got to go cook with Ellie, and we were making some kind of baked good.
Oh, that was so fun.
And Ellie said, well, let's get out the bowl. And my mom's like, well, why aren't you using a Mixmaster? And she said, because I don't use Mixmasters for baked goods because a lot of people may not have a mixer. And so if I make recipes that depend on a mixer, I'm closing out all the people that don't have that. So that's how seriously she takes making cookbooks that really are accessible to everyone.
Yeah. And actually, that's what I wanted to tell you a little bit. Thank you for recognizing that. But I really do. I test all my recipes on regular kitchen equipment. I don't use fancy stuff, even though at home I have like a really high power blender. If I'm blending soups or making smoothies, I use a good quality blender, not a junky one, but I use a regular blender because I do think that's important, that repeatability. But for this book, I tell you what, I had this idea. I feel like a lot of these make-ahead books leave you hanging. Like, okay, you can make it ahead, and then you wonder, like, well, should I reheat it? You know, can I reheat it straight from the oven? Do I have to thaw it first? Do I reheat it covered or uncovered? I feel like there were a million question marks. And so my goal for this book was to, all right, I'm going to give you specific instructions for each recipe, how to best refrigerate it, if it goes in the freezer, how to best freeze it, and then how to best, even if it needs to be thawed and so on. So after about halfway through the book, I was like, why did I decide to do this? Because it was so much work. Yeah. So after testing the recipe and getting it to where I really loved how it tasted and really thought it was, you know, a beautiful recipe and doable, then it was this whole other testing all of a sudden. And sometimes I remade things several times just because I wanted to retest the thaw or something. But yeah. In the end, I'm really glad I did it because every single recipe has those precise instructions, and it really makes a difference because, you know, I did test it to make sure, okay, first of all, that it freezes well, in fact, how long it lasts, whether it should be covered, uncovered, and also most of the frozen items do go straight from the freezer to the oven, which I thought was really important because sometimes I don't have time to think ahead. I want it that night. I didn't have time to think about it the day before. So
was there any recipes that you had to actually change because after you froze them, you realized that it wasn't as good?
Yeah,
afterwards?
A couple I totally ditched from the book because they didn't freeze well. Oh. Despite, you know, there are certain things you know don't freeze well, and there are so many surprises in the book, I think, in terms of freezing. So it's not all freezer stuff, by the way. One of the things that's in the book are salads and also breakfast items. And I think many people don't think that you can make those kinds of things ahead because they're going to be soggy or whatever. But there's so many vegetables that really stand up beautifully in the refrigerator, vegetables and grains that stand up beautifully, like slaws and broccoli salads and whole grain salads. So there's lots in there that will last in the fridge for several days. So they're great to take to work or something like that, or to bring to a barbecue or potluck where you know it's going to really hold up if it's sitting out for a little while or when you're traveling. So so there's that in there. But yeah, so not everything's freezer. But some things I had to throw away. There are certain things you can predict, like you really can't freeze egg dishes because the eggs will, the structure of the eggs will squeeze out the water as it freezes, and then it just becomes soggy and rubbery. So we are trying one of my frittata recipes, which is just refrigerator friendly, like you can make it several days ahead. But you can freeze a quiche. I have a quiche in a bag recipe, which I know,
oh my
right?
gosh.
I really enjoyed finding these things that were like sort of out of the box of how to freeze.
And is it because of the other ingredients that
no,
it actually
you can
helps
you freeze the batter of the quiche. So you make the whole. You can freeze raw eggs. So you make the whole quiche. It's called quiche in a bag, right? So you make the whole batter of the quiche. You put it in a plastic bag, and then you freeze the bag. Freeze it. I double the bag just in case. And then you do have to thaw that. So the night before, let's say you're having a brunch or a party, you can completely do it weeks, even a month ahead or more, and then just thaw it, and then you just give it a stir and pour it into your into your pie shell, and you have a beautiful quiche. It works great. So
That's
it was
cool.
fun to experiment with those kinds of things.
So is there other recipes in there that like that you're doing part of it before you're actually getting it ready to refrigerate or freeze it and then kind of finishing it up?
Yeah, some of them. I try to do that minimally, where you put minimal effort in the day. Sometimes you'll just add an herb at the end, or maybe some fresh spinach into a stew to give it that life. But most of the things are all done.
Right. So tell us about the process that you used for this cookbook or your other cookbooks actually to create the recipes. I know you talked a lot about testing it, but how do you even come up with the ideas for the recipes?
Yeah, it's a fun process, and I do have a team. Mostly I develop my recipes by myself. So I have a weekly column for the Washington Post, and I'm in the kitchen by myself with one helper, and I'm brainstorming those things. But when I have a big project like this, I have a team. So a couple of recipe developers and also kitchen help. And so a lot of it's just like these brainstorming meetings over a glass of wine, you know, often with wine. We often do our tastings with wine, you know. Hey, you know. But so a lot of times we'll just sort of like brainstorm, like what are things that are make ahead? And then just start to write down titles of things. And then as it starts to take a shape, I'll start to see like, okay, I have a lot of chicken things, and I have casseroles, but what else? Maybe we'll do something in a foil pouch, which I have 2 dishes that you just put the raw ingredients into the foil pouch, freeze that just like that, and then it goes straight from freezer to oven the day of. So, you know, trying to think of different methods. Oh, I have one is a chicken dish, and one is one is on the cards that you're all getting. It's the shrimp and foil packets, Cajun shrimp. So it's lots of vegetables. I always am thinking, how am I going to get more veggies in there? So even if it's a more traditional dish that might not typically have vegetables, I'll throw in some. So that's sort of a fun aspect. And then another thing I did was I did several things in muffin tins. And then I also did several things in jars, so salads in jars, because I feel like that single serving aspect of things also really helps people. And I feel that, so when you do like a mini mac and cheese or mini turkey meatloaves in the muffin tin, you get like individual servings. And I feel, for me, so I have a 13-year-old daughter, and so she might be going to volleyball or something. She can literally pop one of those mini meatloaves out, and one is a snack, and maybe 2 is more of an entree. But she can pop one out just to give her, and the exact reheating instructions are on there. Oh, by the way, I provided the reheating instructions for microwave for everything, as well as a conventional oven or stove. So that was just added to the fun in the testing world. But yeah, so this way it makes it possible for her. Or if you have little kids, then you can leave the food with the babysitter with the instructions. So I just feel like it speaks to the way we live, even though ideally we all like to sit together and have a meal whenever possible. Like, real life gets in the way. And I think that's the thing, you know, we have to be realistic about what we can do and try to make the best of any given situation.
No, you really do capitalize on how people's lives work, and that you're going to have some times where if you really are serious about cooking, you will be able to put into cooking, but it may not be right at the time that your family's going to be able to be there to eat. Yeah. I know I will take this on and do this because I get home and my boys are starving. Teenage boys eat a lot. And so I need foods that are ready right away. So when you're thinking about ingredients or recipes, I know you're always thinking about putting more vegetables and things and making things healthier, yet not really doing that to a point that you obsess over the healthfulness of it, because I think that, you know, you do that. But how much are you actually encouraging people to eat buy organic ingredients or local ingredients? How does that fit into what you're thinking about?
Yeah, so I mean, I really firmly believe in like local seasonal eating and knowing your farmer. I also think, I feel like it's really important to just let people work with the tools that they have. And that it shouldn't be an elitist proposition to eat well. And I work with lots of different hunger organizations. I think this book, people who may be getting food from a food pantry can use the recipes in this book. So I feel like what I try to do is encourage those types of decision making, that type of decision making. And I think with what you're doing with policy and so on, I mean, if we can make those kinds of foods more affordable, more accessible to people,
yes,
then that would be wonderful too, right? And I think we're headed in that direction, fortunately. But yeah, so I think it's important, but I don't put a mandate in the book in any way. And I feel like people can do what they can do to the best of their ability. But one of the things that I really like about the idea of freezing is that you can make things when they're in season. So you can take advantage of seasonal local produce. When you're getting a huge bounty of basil, and then you can make the pesto and freeze it, or you're getting a huge bounty of whatever vegetable it is or fruit it is at the time, you can really take advantage of the lower prices that are going to be there and the bounty that's going to be there, and make these dishes and then have them for when you want a little taste of summer, like today. It'd be nice.
Actually, I think that's a great way to look at it, because I try to eat really pretty seasonally, and it's great when you can have something frozen from the summer, and I always feel like it's a little summer in the winter, and it's a great thing to actually be able to do. So you write for the Washington Post, and there was actually an article that you may have seen in the Washington Post last week that was about, do we have a food movement? And really being critical about, it's actually maybe the way we ask questions that, yes, it's often said that 93% of the population, wants GMO labeled food, but if you ask people to say what issues they care about, that doesn't come up. What do you think from the people that you talk to? Are people actually shifting the way they're thinking about eating and food, or not? Or how do you see that?
Well, I think just from being in the media and having my finger on the pulse of the media, I think there's a huge interest that was not necessarily there 20 years ago. There's a sweeping interest in that. There's a concern, there's a realization, a sort of, well, of course, realization that food and where it comes from is important, and how it affects our bodies and the earth, which that conversation was not there in the public 20 years ago.
It was not. When we were in school here, we were talking about that here, but it was not out in the public at all.
Yeah. So I think that in that regard, absolutely. I also feel like I try not to live in a bubble, but it's very easy to live in your own little bubble, especially when you love food. It's funny because my mother-in-law lives in Michigan, Lansing, Michigan, and it's sort of the outskirts, outer part of town. And she's my focus group of one. Like, I'll call her and say, "Ma, can you get tamarind paste?" And if she can't get it, I won't put it in the book. But I feel like here in New York, well, of course you can get tamarind paste. In DC, right. And so I feel like I want to try to make sure that I can connect with the average person. And in some ways, I feel I'll go to different, on the road with the book or whatever. And there's definitely an amazing response to the book across the nation from all different demographics. But I am surprised at what I find in restaurants and things, and I feel like is really different and very easy to live in your food-oriented bubble.
Yeah.
So I would say yes, there's a huge differences, and also maybe not as much as we think living here.
My husband's from Western Nebraska, and I can tell you, the food there is really different than it is here. Yeah. And on that note, to go back to something that you said before about policy, is I would agree, the conversation is changing, and I actually think the conversation is changing faster than the food supply is changing, and that's what we're really trying to do, is work really hard on creating policies that will actually allow us to create a food system that has more good food in it, make sure that we actually are able to pay food workers all along the food chain well, and I think that the more we're able to do that, the more that probably you'll be able to write different cookbooks in 10 years or so, because being able to get some of those ingredients, or really thinking about locally sourced things, would be something that's going to be easier for everybody, and so therefore it will become more mainstream. So I'm hopeful that will happen.
I completely agree. And even the ingredients now, it's amazing. When I wrote my first cookbook, I had to give instructions of how to make Greek yogurt. In every recipe, I said, and it's actually quite easy to do. You take a paper towel and you put regular yogurt in it and you let it strain out overnight in the refrigerator, and the whey comes out, and you can use that for something or discard it or whatever. But then inside is this beautiful thickened yogurt. So because really Greek yogurt was only available, and this isn't even that, this is like 10 years ago. So it's pretty remarkable how just Greek yogurt now I could just write, oh, put Greek yogurt in a bowl, you know, and so it's pretty amazing just that. So our food supply is changing, and it does, when the food supply changes, it makes people's diets change. I mean, there's one direct sort of link there. And then also, I mean, this is not local at all, but like chia seeds, I put chia seeds in this book, which, and they're so widely available, people are aware of them. There's quinoa in the book. So these kinds of foods, you know, whoever even heard of that 10 years ago?
That's right. So in addition to writing cookbooks, you also are on television shows, and I know you've been working on a new show. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about that?
Okay, first I'm going to do a happy dance. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm so excited. I really feel like I'm doing the happy dance in my head, okay? If there weren't a camera, I might actually do one. Yeah, so my new TV show for public television, it's called Ellie's Real Good Food. And I've been working really hard for the past couple of years, sort of navigating the world of public television, which is a whole, you know, has just figuring out how that all works. But finally, it's happening, and I'm thrilled. I just shot all the episodes, and we're just getting the go-ahead that we're in all the major markets. In New York will be on LIW starting in May. And I'm just thrilled to be on the Create channel and as well. And yeah, so it's all about hitting the sweet spot where delicious and healthy meet. It's very much what I do. Practical solutions, fun, delicious, all about the joy. And I feel like if you come to this, if you just come to food that happens to be good for you, and you come to it with joy and passion and a sense for taste and balance, then you're gonna just want it. So it's an easy sell because it's just delicious. So
that's right.
So that's what I hope to, that's what's happening literally on the show. And in each episode, I meet a real person or an individual or a group, maybe a group of friends or a family dealing with some kind of food issue that everyone could relate to.
Oh, that's great.
Like, you know, we have a single mom who is basically just, her kids are eating bars for breakfast as they walk out the door. They're all just bored and miserable with them, but they don't know some solutions. So a lot of these solutions for her breakfast came from this book, but they're on the show. And then we have one couple. The guy is a total carnivore, and the wife is a vegetarian, and they literally make 2 separate meals every night, so they don't eat the same food at all. And so it was about bringing them together and creating these dishes that would make both of them happy.
Kind of like reality show, cook show.
Yeah,
right?
in a way, yeah. But it always comes back to the kitchen, and you learn recipes and so on, but it has this little reality element to it. It's fun. If you want to be on it, let me know.
So part of your message has always been that it's possible, and I think your show goes along with that it's possible for anyone, given the tools and knowledge, to live life to the maximum by being in a healthy balance, nourishing a richly satisfying and scrumptious, attainable lifestyle. So what kind of tips do you have for everybody here that I think are either busy students or maybe busy parents to actually be able to get to that lifestyle?
The thing I've been really into saying lately is don't let perfect get in the way of better. And I really think this sense of, and especially when it comes to, the more educated you are, the more you know what's really kind of ideal, right? So I want to go to the farmer's market and buy my vegetables from Ray Bradley, their dirt's going to be clinging to them. I know exactly how they were grown. I'm going to buy some pork chops from him because he raised the cow. And is that possible every day? No. Every week, maybe in the summer. I usually try to get there once a week, but that's not always possible. And so I'm not going to feel bad about buying a box of arugula. I'm just not. And so I feel like, or I'll try to make better choices in that I'll buy an organic one or a locally grown. But then that's bringing in that word better. So it's not perfect, perhaps, my notion of perfect, and even for your very own self, what you expect to put on the table. You know, sometimes I'll just take a piece of fish and put salt and pepper on it and broil it, and that's, you know, and make a vegetable, and that's dinner. And it's not a gourmet meal that's meeting whatever ridiculous expectations I may have conjured. So it's about, you know, and by the way, I happen to love that, just plain broiled fish with like lemon all over it and like a lot of cracked pepper. It's delicious. So I think that is perfect, actually. I don't even know what I'm talking about. But yeah, so I think trying to be perfect, sometimes leaves you just to throw your hands in the air and say, oh, it can't be perfect. It may as well get a, you know, like you're in the airport and you're like, oh, I can't do my exact, you know, steel cut oats. Oh, may as well get a cinnamon bun the size of my head. You know, it sort of becomes that when those aren't the only two choices.
That's right. So we're about to turn it over to the audience for questions. So while they're thinking about questions, I know that some of the audience is students. What would be some of the things that you feel like are some of the biggest things that you learned in our program that really have stayed with you?
Wow. I mean, I often say that my experience here like blew my mind open. Like I had a certain notion of nutrition. I majored in nutrition as an undergrad. In clinical nutrition, I had a certain notion of it as vitamins and minerals and the science of that, biochemistry. And I come here and all of a sudden it's sociology, it's agriculture, it's politics, it's policy, it's sensory perception, it's family. Like just the whole broad view of it really profoundly affected my view of health and nutrition. And you know, you can't go back now. Once you have that, you know, you can't unknow that in the best possible way. Like it will shape your thinking and your work for the rest of your life, I think.
I love that because I feel like now as I'm teaching, we have all these eye-opening experiences, and you're right. You can never unknow something that you've learned, and that stays with us, and that's great. What questions do people have for Ellie? In the back.
Hi, Ellie. TC graduate, although later than you, although I look like I should have been earlier than you. And I congratulate you on PBS. I grew up on watching Julia Child on PBS. Just can't say anything more than that. Really letting people know how old you are. Yeah, exactly. I am really letting people know how old I am. When you're cooking for your family, do you always have cookbooks in mind, or do you just, I mean, you did talk about just broiling the fish and stuff, but in general, are you always thinking, oh, I wonder if this can go in a cookbook, or are you just enjoying it and then you think later, oh, this could go in a cookbook?
Yeah, I think one of the things I love about what I do is there is a huge element of creative process. And I think when you are thinking in a creative, artistic way, you're never not doing that. Like, because I feel like the best ideas often come to me when I'm not trying. It's almost if I sit at my desk and I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to cook for this book or for this article? I can't come up with anything. It's almost when I'm out in the world and I'm at the market, I'm like, oh wow, that would go well together, or I see something at a restaurant. So it's in my experiences that I feel like where I really come up with the things, and so I'm always taking notes. And so one of my favorite stories of this is that I was cutting fennel for a salad, and my daughter was eating a nectarine, and she took a piece of fennel and put it in her mouth. I was like, Mom, these go really well together.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, well, let me try. And we've tried, and one of the recipes in my last book was this fennel, then I ran with that. You know, so I made it with this citrus dressing with crispy prosciutto. It was so good. And it was coming from this notion of just looking at food in this creative way, and I think I live that. But without stressing about it. I just sort of relax, and it's like it comes to you a little bit if you let it.
That sort of leads to my next question, which is what I like to do sometimes, especially if it's cold out and I don't feel like going out, is I sort of go in my pantry and see what's there and try to put stuff together. Is that something that you do also?
Oh, totally. I love that. I almost love it if I go to someone's house and I'm like, okay, there's like 5 ingredients. You know, what can I do? I'll make this rub, or that's a fun, that's like sort of the chopped challenge, you know, where you get the literally.
Well, they're not throwing in something really bizarre that you don't.
Right. You don't have to use that, you know, marshmallow fluff in there or whatever.
Well, I can tell you too, she's always thinking about recipes, because one time I had her over with a bunch of other people and we were making my handed down from generations recipe for manicotti for my family, and I just make it and I'm like, well, you just stir it until it's right, and she's like, well, let's count how many times. And I was like, that's beautiful. It's like the cookbook writer.
I wrote it out for you. I even measured, like, she's like, oh, you put it about this much. I'm like, well, I'm measuring. After I put it in measuring cups. Actually, that is one thing about testing recipes, is that I measure everything very carefully, and then it sort of tortures me because I have to measure it in order to do the nutrition analysis, which is a whole other arm of it. I have to, you know, be extra careful with measurement, which I think is good because it makes the recipes more repeatable. But then I have to measure, say if I dredge something in flour and it doesn't use all the flour, I have to measure the flour you don't use. and subtract that. And then if, let's say, marinade comes off of something, I measure the marinade that came off. So then when it's done, people want to know what a serving size is. So I measure, I'll make a beautiful, I don't know, souffle or something, and then I have to like measure how many cups it yields. So whenever I get to cook without measuring is actually really fun for me. But that recipe was such a joy to be able to experience with you in your home with your family.
Yes.
And to be able to write it down, because my husband did this video of his mom making her famous chicken and mashed potatoes, and it's amazing because the recipe is literally like, take this bowl, it's like one specific bowl that she uses, fill it up to here with flour. Like if that bowl broke, like she would not know how to make the thing. So I was following her around measuring everything.
That's great.
No, I use ESHA, which is food processor. I think that's one of the standard, like, industrial ones.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Mindy Liss. I'm a writer at Teachers College and a big fan of Pam's and the center. And it's just great to meet you, and it brings to life what we write about there. And actually, I just was thinking, as you talk about your families, we tried to get my grandmother's recipe for stuffed cabbage, and my mother read it off to us, and she said, get one nice cabbage. So we didn't know what that was. But it actually is my question to you is, what in your younger life do you think influenced you to get to where you are now?
Yeah. So my I often quote my mom with this, because so she says, me becoming a nutritionist is like a pyromaniac becoming a firefighter. I was born loving food. I just always was fascinated by it and seeking flavor experiences. And growing up in New York was just great and so influential for me, because my parents were really, my mom worked full time and went to school at night. Cooking was a chore for her. I had most of my meals, my dinners at my grandma's house, which was a block away, and she did a proper dinner every night starting with like half a grapefruit or a melon, and then a salad, and then a nice, meat and 2 vegetables. I mean, it was a nice sort of really a balanced meal, family meal as often. But growing up in New York with food-loving family, and going to Zabar's. I grew up going to Zabar's with my dad and tasting the fish at the counter, and he grew up going there with his dad, I think. So it's like, oh no, that would have been too many generations. I'm now bringing my daughter, so it's like a 3-generation thing. And then I remember my first experience eating spanakopita, and I feel it was at a Greek church fair in Queens, where I grew up in Queens, and literally I remember my first bite, and like, it was a revelation. I feel like on some level I'm always trying to get back there. In this book I have a mixed greens spinach pie, Filo pie. If you haven't worked with Filo, like, this is a perfect kind of starter recipe, because it can tear or whatever, it doesn't matter, you just kind of put it in there. So you don't have to be good at it or anything. But yeah, so I think living here, my parents would take us to, we were always really on a tight budget, and my mother was a teacher, my father was a cop in New York, and but we would go to like a Dominican restaurant in Queens, and the whole family would eat for $12 or something. But I got to try all of these amazing foods, and I feel like that multiculturalism really is reflected in all my books. I have all different, without it, but still with a very accessible pantry list. So you don't have to buy any crazy off-the-wall spices and herbs and ingredients. So keeping it, I like to say I use ordinary ingredients in extraordinary ways. So, but that multiculturalism is definitely part of it. And then I traveled the world also to pay for college. I did modeling and TV commercials, and I wound up going to Europe and Japan and all over, and really on a very low budget, and wound up going to all these markets and cooking a lot. And I really learned so much, eating street food a lot, and learned so much about that. And that really also really informed my recipes. So, but I grew up in a Jewish family, going to Zabar's and eating my matzo ball soup is my comfort food, totally. So
that's maybe one last question before we do the book signing. Anyone else got a question for Ellie?
I think I can talk So I have a question that's a little bit harder than what Cooke is talking about. For those people that we meet and work with who are really not ready to eat healthy and to find that sweet spot between healthy and delicious, do you have any suggestions for how to move them, Prochaska's stages of change, how to move them toward the action stage if they're in pre-contemplation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I think recipes, I think about that a lot, by the way. And that's why I think one thing about TV, I mean, I can't tell you to, go on TV, but like that, I feel like that's one thing that could kind of inspire people. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't put the word healthy in the title of my show. It's Ellie's Real Good Food. My hope is that someone, okay, I'm going to get the people who want to eat healthy, they're going to tap into that. My hope is that someone who could care less about it is going to watch, be like, oh, that looks good. And that comes back to, I think a recipe is an amazing nutrition education tool. So literally just appeal to people because it tastes good, because they're motivated by taste. Everyone is motivated by taste. Don't even say anything about it being healthy. Maybe that comes later. But if you say, oh, try this. Here's my favorite banana bread recipe, whatever. And they try it, and now they know they can make it. Now they know they like it. Suddenly, they're at that wow. They're at this revelation that, and then maybe later tell them that it's healthy, or maybe never. I don't know. I mean, I think the best way to get people to eat healthy is just cook for them. So obviously you can't do that with clients per se, but that's where recipes, I think, really come in, and appealing to people's sense of flavor and taste. Find out what flavors they like. And run with that. And don't even talk about the health aspect of it if it's not of interest to them at that point. That would be my 2 cents. I don't know.
And I think just to add on to that is what you said before about doing what's better. Is sometimes just getting people to try that first thing works. Somebody that I worked with a really long time ago when I was in college, she said, you know what, I'll never go to lunch without having French fries. And I said, just try one day not having French fries. Because she kind of felt like she wanted to change things. And then a month later, she came in and she said, you know what? I had French fries today at lunch, and I realized I hadn't had them in 2 weeks. And I realized now I don't know why I ever thought I needed them every day. So sometimes it just takes that taking the first step that actually can make people get over that hurdle. And then the next steps get easier and easier.
It's great. I think we've all learned a little bit today. So let's thank Ellie for being here with us tonight. And congratulations on your new book and your new show. And we're always excited to see what you're going to be doing next and ways to inspire us to take on some new habits that'll make us all a little bit healthier. So at this time, we are now going to sample some of Ellie's delicious recipes from this book and a couple from previous cookbooks. So please enjoy the reception. We'll actually take a few minutes just to get reset up for the book signing, but when we do, we'll probably start the line and then kind of go around this way. So please feel free to come on up and enjoy the reception, and thank you so much again, Ellie.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for coming.
And thank you, Rosella.
Yeah.
I think she's out of the range. She's sure. It's embarrassing, and I hate doing that, but I couldn't not. So now